Hello, I'm Morag Gamble, and this is a Sense Making in a Changing World podcast of the Permaculture Education Institute. I invite you to join me in conversation each week with leading permaculture-related educators, thinkers, activists, authors, designers, and practitioners to explore the kind of thinking and action we need to navigate a positive and regenerative way forward, to myceliate possibilities and share ideas of what a thriving one planet way of life could look like. My guests offer voices of clarity and common sense. In this episode, I'm joined by Laura Oldanie. She's a permaculture graduate who coaches people about cultivating a different relationship with money, and she's the founder too of Rich and Resilient Living. She got her PTC back in 2009 and since then has been exploring ways to earn, spend, invest, and managing her money and lifestyle to bring about the kind of change she wants to see in the world, and teaching this with others to help them do the same. Laura's been featured in things like Forbes, CNBC, and Good Housekeeping, and she's the co-author of the life-changing book Growing Free, and free meaning financially resilient and economically empowered, with the subtitle Building the Life of Your Dreams Without Losing Your Soul or Destroying the Planet. Before we head to my conversation with Laura, I'd first like to acknowledge that I'm recording this episode from my parents' hand-built home on a little island in beautiful Gunner country in the south of Australia. I'm surrounded by hundreds of koalas, actually, in the trees out here that are protected. And I'm so proud to say that my gran, Bessie Gamble, introduced them here after hearing that they were being culled elsewhere. Good on you, Gran. Anyway, as I said, this podcast is a project of the Permaculture Education Institute. We work with people on 6 continents, teaching permaculture design and teaching skills, teaching how to be a community leader and how to create a regenerative permaculture livelihood, finding appropriate ways to apply the planet care ethics of earth care, people care, and fair share wherever you are. I invite you to join me here. To find out more about our courses, visit permacultureeducationinstitute.org/courses, and you can start anytime. If you'd like to find more about our education programs, just book a call with me and I'd be really happy to chat. You can find the link in the show notes below. And remember to subscribe to Sense Making the Changing World on your favorite podcast app and to share it freely. And please do leave us a 5-star review and lovely comment, because it really does help people find this podcast. So let's now turn to my conversation with Laura about permaculture and money. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Laura. It's a delight to have you here, and particularly as we start the new year, to be exploring this idea of wealth and abundance and freedom. And it's a lot of the things that people talk about when, they think about, all right, I'm going to get into this new year and this is the sorts of goals that I have. But the kind of way that you're expressing wealth and freedom and abundance has a different twist. It has a permaculture twist. And I'm really excited about the conversation that we're going to go into here. So welcome. I'm here on the unceded lands of the Gunner here in the southern parts of Australia. Where are you calling in from right now?
So yes, Morag, thank you for hosting me on your podcast. I'm so glad to be having this conversation with you. I'm based in Tampa Bay, Florida, in the United States, the land of the Tocobagan Indians. And yeah, I'm very excited to get to have this conversation with you and your audience.
Yeah, thank you, Laura, for being here. So maybe we could begin with this idea. And so for those of you listening, Laura and I are going to really jump into this whole idea of money and permaculture and trying to remove a bit of the ick concept of talking about money when we talk about permaculture, how permaculture principles and ethics can influence permaculture, how we can really think from a permaculture perspective about how to create that richness and wealth and security and freedom in your life. But I wanted to begin, first of all, by asking you, Laura, what does wealth mean to you?
Well, I think for each of us, there are going to be different nuances, of what wealth is. I think it is a healthy, joyful life, and on a climate challenged planet. I think wealth looks a lot different than what we're sold from a conventional perspective of wealth looking like, because, we're sold wealth as primarily financial capital. And these days, financial capital is basically just these digits in the ether. And so if the power goes out for a long period of time, or, accounts get hacked, that wealth, I'm saying that in quote marks, just disappears. Whereas the connections, the relationships, the things that make us truly resilient in our lives, especially in the midst of the climate challenges and political and economic challenges that we face, that's where, to my mind, the true wealth is.
Yeah, great. And I'd really like to touch base on all those different threads that you just mentioned, particularly, different kinds of capital as well. But before we do, can we just, like, what are some of those myths that you've identified that we're being sold?
Well, I think some of it is that we are sold this myth that we need to buy things, to be a certain person, to be perceived a certain way. I read somewhere that people, we're now referred to more in the media as consumers than citizens. We've lost our identity as citizens, and we've stepped into this consumer role. I think it is one myth that permeates, or one thing that we're sold. I think, this whole idea about retirement planning and how we should plan for retirement by saving a lot of money, but by doing it in a way where you're working so hard that you're creating the health problems that you feel like you need to save the money up for in retirement along the way. Whereas if we just rethought, stopped and shifted our thinking around things and designed, more effectively and in a smarter way, we wouldn't feel the need to pursue money in that way. I'm not saying that money doesn't play a role. This is a conversation about permaculture and money, but I think we can rethink a lot of things about, what we're being told about how much money we need, what we need it for, why we need it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was thinking, what you just said about, we're measured as consumers. We've just come through Christmas, and I don't tune into mainstream news terribly much, but I must have gone past something and said, "Oh, we've had a great Christmas this year. The consumption is up. We've bought a lot more." And I thought, does that make this part of the year really good because we've just bought a whole lot of stuff? Like it's fed into us so much in all the different kind of conventional media. And also that sense of, yeah, security, like you're secure when you have a whole lot of assets stashed away somewhere, and that gives you the security. Whereas, the relationality, the connection to place, connection to community, your access to resources and people to support you, you can have a whole lot of money, but you can be not have access to the things which can create a good and happy and fulfilled life where you get the kind of care that we all, need and crave. So I think there's a whole lot of redefinitions of wealth, like redefining wealth is a really important part, and redefining what it means to, yeah, like what do we need? What's enough? And I know this is a big part of the question too. So maybe you could sort of take off from there, that sort of sense of enoughness and how this fits into our concept of wealth and money.
Well, yes, definitely. Again, enough and consumption, and I think, uh, enough, and again, wealth, enough, personal finance, it's personal. It's all going to be different for different people. But I think a big part of, stepping into a wealthy life is getting clear on what a wealthy life looks like or means to you. And then when you're making your spending and purchasing decisions, thinking about, is it moving you towards that vision of your wealthy life or your permaculture life? And at some point you're going to get there, and then you're at enough. And if you're going beyond that, that's beyond enough. And if you get too much beyond enough, that's ineffective. That's just then we're getting into waste and inefficient use of energies.
Yeah. What got
So,
you started, Laura? Where did you have an epiphany about money?
well, it was multiple factors. Part of it was my discovery of permaculture, which happened almost 15 years ago now, in my late 30s, early 40s. And at that time, I was working, but I was already environmentally and socially conscious, but I had done the conventionally responsible thing and started putting money in retirement savings, investing in the stock market. And so when I got to my permaculture design course, one of my first questions was, because I live in the US, what does health insurance look like in permaculture, in the US, since we don't have universal health care? What are people doing with their retirement savings? Yes, I want this permaculture life, but I'm also a fiscally responsible person, and I have these monies and I want to, I don't want to just give them away because I want to, be able to support myself in retirement, but I would like to steward them more, that money more in line with my permaculture values. And so, for me, when I got to permaculture, I was looking to the sections in in Mollison's Designer's Manual, in the Permaculture City, in the in Rosemary Morrow's book, about what are people doing about investing in retirement and money. And that's really what drew my attention. Those were the conversations I wanted to be having. And about the same time I discovered permaculture, I had discovered Vicki Robbins' book, Your Money or Your Life.
Mhm.
I was finding the FIRE movement, the financial independence, retire early. And I was like, I like that, but I want permaculture fire. What does permaculture fire look like? And so it was this journey to piece it all together. What could permaculture fire look like? And along the way, I started blogging and finding different things that I could do with my money here in the US that felt more aligned with my values. And I realized the importance of, permaculture. We get so excited about designing our gardens and our landscapes with it, and that's certainly what drew me in. But I was like, wow, this is a really good lifestyle design tool as well, and money is a big part of lifestyle design. And then I just kept, I would Google search like permaculture and financial independence, or permaculture, financial freedom. Who's talking about this? What are people doing? And eventually I encountered some other people who were also having these conversations around permaculture fire. And eventually we wrote our book, Growing Free. So we went from FIRE, financial independence, retire early, which in this idea of financial independence, again, as I say, is very attractive, but FIRE is generally achieved by investing in the stock market. And I didn't want to achieve that version of FIRE. And so for us, my co-authors and I, we came up with this acronym FREE, which stands for financially resilient and economically empowered, or the full version would be financially resilient and economically, ecologically, and ethically empowered.
Love it.
And so we came up with this 400 plus page book with a subtitle of Building the Life of Your Dreams Without Losing Your Soul or Destroying the Planet. And it's largely drawn on permaculture, thinking about the permaculture asset classes. How do we design financially viable lives for ourselves, so we can have our permaculture dreams?
Mm. So let's go there then, because I'm sure that listeners are going, this sounds fantastic. What does it look like? What does growing free look like? What are some of the strategies that you use for shifting from investing in the most, what we understand to be the most highest returning things? That's what we're told, go into stocks. I just as a little segue, I've grown up in a household that's always said, like, let's not put money into stocks, let's invest in community, let's invest in sustainable things. And so I've never ever had anything in stocks. And now I'm getting to this point thinking, well, what am I going to do for myself in my retirement? I'm debt free. I've purposely, set myself up to be that way. Um, a lot of people around like I'm 55, I don't know how old you are, but we're sort of going, okay, we live this permaculture life. What does our retirement investment sensibly look like? And it is a big question. And I'd love for us to dive into what
Yes.
that might look like. What can we be doing to make our retirement secure and permaculturally ethical as well?
Sure. Well, I'll start. Well, let me first talk to retirement planning a little bit, and we'll work our way back up to that because I really think this is a huge gap in the permaculture space, this whole idea of permaculture retirement planning. Because so much of permaculture revolves around, food forests and being active out in the yard and these, larger yards and spaces. And eventually our bodies aren't going to be able to physically do what we've been doing outside, in those physically active spaces. So I'm going to talk us through some of that, to that point. But I will say, I still think there's a big gap, and that is what something I would like to see a lot more of is what does permaculture retirement planning look like, and what can it be? In terms of the earlier part, because there's one thing is retirement, and the later in life retirement. Our book really focuses on the financial independence earlier in life. We do get to, a little bit of, the later years at the end, but it's really focused on how do we get that financial independence earlier so we're not waiting until we're 65 to start, leading those financially free permaculture lives. And so dialing it back again, that very first step, I think, is what I said before, just getting clear on what a wealthy permaculture life looks like to you so that you've got that vision. And when you're making your financial decisions, you're making the financial decisions that are going to move you as best as possible towards that. But it's also, stepping up to money. I think so often we're scared to look at our money numbers, especially in permaculture. And we're taught that money is bad or negative. And certainly we see how is used in horrible ways. But it is a resource, to be managed. It's an energy. And permaculture is a great tool for helping us wisely steward and manage resources and energies. And so taking that honest look, opening up your accounts, doing that assessment of how much money do I have in my various accounts? How much do I owe? What money is coming into my life? What money is going out? Where is it going? What is it for? Get that whole clear picture of your finances, and then if there is debt, that's not a mortgage, that's like the big credit card debt or the, high interest debt that is really dramatically and negatively impacting your finances, you want to focus on attacking that debt, and paying it down and coming up with strategies and prioritizing that. And then once you've come to that, no bad debt stage, then we want to start catching and storing energy, that energy of money. We want to be obtaining a yield. I think the permaculture principles, and that's what I tried to do in my Permaculture and Money ebook, is show how these permaculture principles so directly and easily apply to money as well, because money, again, is an energy and resource. And so, then when we're out of debt, when we are attaining that yield, we can catch and store energy in various ways. We can catch and store that money in various ways. And some of it will be what we started talking about a little bit ago about these financial investments that we can make beyond Wall Street or beyond the stock market. And then there are, the kinds of regenerative asset class investments or the permaculture asset class investments that, Mollison is talking about in the designer's manual, where we're thinking regeneratively, the things that we're more used to thinking about in permaculture, where we're investing in, certain high yield and high earning fruit trees and, plant genetics and, but we're thinking about these things as investments. I think that it's unfortunate that so much of that language and those ideas got co-opted in a negative way, but we can be, investing these regenerative investments that we can make. I have planted soap nut trees in my yard because there's no one else growing soap nuts in my area. And so part of my retirement plan is these native soap nut trees. So I'll have soap nuts that I can sell and gift and barter, so there's that regenerative investment side. Or maybe we make collaboratively, we make regenerative investments with our neighbors or community. So we invest in a tool that we all need, but maybe then we can rent it out to other neighborhoods. It's like there are investments that we can be making. Going back to the financial investments, here, I'm based in the US. There are more and more opportunities, investing opportunities that are aligned with our permaculture values outside of the stock market. For example, there's a platform here in the US called Steward that makes loans to regenerative farmers. And you can contribute up as little as $100 and be earning 5 to 8% making a loan to a regenerative farmer. There are nonprofits that have investment funds. And you can earn a small bit of interest, and your money's being used in marginalized or lower income communities.
Yeah.
So I even have heard in Australia of the Organic Investment Cooperative, ORIC. So people can be investing with ORIC and earning a return on their investment in this organic investment cooperative. And I think it's going into regenerative agriculture as well, or regenerative food systems. There's something in the UK called the Stockwood Community Benefit Society, where I believe investors earn 5%, and it's going towards something similar. So there are these opportunities, and it's an opportunity for us in the permaculture space to think about how do we create more of these. We can be investing in each other, in each other's projects, in permaculture businesses if we create these infrastructures.
Yeah, I mean, I live in an area where Bill Mollison had tasked someone called Jill Jordan to start up a permaculture bank. It was called the Mullany Credit Union, and it ran for 30 years, and it just only in the last couple of years merged into another kind of community bank. But for 30 years, there was this bank that was based on permaculture principles and put its surplus back into the community, and absolutely brilliant. So this thinking differently about where we put our money, thinking differently about the kind of bank that we put it in. It's getting harder and harder to set up permaculture kind of banks, but we can be thinking about different investment opportunities. But I also really like how you're talking about investing in a different kind of economy. We can talk about or different kind of capital, our social capital, our environmental capital, the living capital, all these other sorts of capitals that we can be investing in. So I wonder if you could maybe describe a little bit more some of those different capitals that really help to bring forward this wealth and abundance that we need in all different stages of our life. So, I mean, I love that you talked about this, like thinking about it early, not just wait until you're getting retired, but how can we start this early? But that is definitely part of investing in all those different kinds of capitals. I know that in my own life that, if I hadn't been involved in creating community capital in my early 20s, I probably never would have been where I am now, this like deeply connection to community that supported one another as we evolved our permaculture careers in different ways. And it was absolutely central to the kind of work that I do today. So What are those capitals as you see them and describe them?
Sure. Well, and there again, this is something I was introduced to through permaculture, to the extent that there are discussions around economics and finance in permaculture. It often centers around these 8 forms of capital. And, there's a pretty well-known article from, 15 years or so ago about them. And, the first one is financial capital, the one we all know the most and operate in. But then there's also material capital. So that's our laptops, our phones, our cars, the buildings we're in. It's also our tools. My boyfriend is a beekeeper, and I remember at one time he spent like $120 on a wax press so that he could press more honey out of the wax and have more honey to sell. And within one season, that wax press paid for itself. So again, these are the investments that I'm talking about. How do we think in terms of investments so that when we're spending money, we're doing it in a way where the money stays on our holistic balance sheet? Maybe it's no longer in our financial capital column, but it stays on this more holistic wealth balance sheet and it's moved into the material capital column. Then there is experiential capital. These are our skills that we're so excited about building in permaculture, whether it's knowing how to repair your own bicycle tire, or to cook or get out in the garden, just these things we learn by doing this experiential capital. There's intellectual capital, the things we learn in school or from reading in books. That's our creativity and our innovation. Then there is spiritual capital. Maybe that's your yoga practice, your meditation practice, or a religious faith. Then there's social capital, and this, that's the one you were just talking about and how important it is. And I think everyone in permaculture gets that. And I do really think, I talk sometimes about climate resilient wealth, and because as I mentioned before, I don't think financial capital is very climate resilient. And I think at the end of the day, the truly climate resilient form of wealth is our social capital. I just experienced here in the US 2 major hurricanes here in Florida this year, and it was just striking to see people come out and help each other. That's when we see it, is after these natural disasters, a neighbor coming out and helping neighbor, other people from another part of the area driving in to donate, after people have lost their homes. But it's this social capital that really is where our true resilience lies. But then there's also cultural capital, and these are, again, all of these, I think it was Mollison who said, I think he said at one point that, all financial capital came from converting these other forms of capital somehow into financial capital. So even cultural capital, you think about how you go to a new city and you pay a tour guide to learn about the culture, or the food, the history, the music of an area. And then there's, what we most know and love in permaculture, the living capital. So the mango trees outside here in Florida, the air we breathe, the clean water. And, really what we want financial capital for is to exchange it to get directly to access these other forms of capital. And it's like, well, we're really good in permaculture at design and strategy. So how do we do more to bypass money so we can save it for ourselves or for our retirement, for our communities, to invest in these regenerative projects and figure out ways to go more directly to these other forms of capital, which are what we really want. And so that's the 8 forms of capital they talked about. I also do think about health as a form of capital, and I really, as I think about retirement planning, be it a permaculture retirement or a climate resilient retirement, I think health is so important. It's going to be extremely important to deal with, the higher temperatures we're going to have. navigating our properties when all of the branches are down after the storm, or, we're fleeing because there's a fire coming. It's just that's going to be an invaluable form of capital, and that we can be investing in much earlier in our lives and prioritizing. Time is another form of capital that, we will all want to be able to, have autonomy over our time to make decisions so that we get to use our time the way we want.
I really like that because I think that's one, those two that you mentioned there that haven't been listed on that sort of on that, the article that you mentioned that we're all familiar with, that the time and the health. And I think time, if we can really start to think differently about how we use our time and how we use our time to enrich our health, our community, and the living world in particular. My mind is going at the moment to young people because it's probably the same in your country. The conversation is around, well, how do we even get started in this? Because like the housing market is so high, all these issues, or how do people get unstuck when they're in it so deep and they have so much debt? How do they start to shift to a more regenerative way? And so I know you talked about like looking at where things are coming and going, but it feels to me like we need to have a radical rethink about how we do housing and how we think about where we live and how we live. I mean, a lot of these sort of the capitals that we're talking about and thinking about retirement, I feel rather more secure because I live in an eco-village. I live in a place where I know everyone. I know who the milkers and who the beekeepers and who's the baker, and I know, where I can get some firewood for my fire. And, I'm really connected to that place and I feel secure because I don't feel like I can fall over because the neighbors are there and we know them and they're a call away or a holler away. And that sense of security that you have in that richness of relationship with place and community. But how do you begin when housing is so high? I mean, do we start to think differently about, like starting more eco-villages, starting more intentional communities, sharing our housing resources more rather than thinking about getting an individual house? I wonder what kind of conversations you're having with people around housing.
Sure. I guess housing is a big issue. I do think it gets to some of what you were just saying. And, if we think about in permaculture, the problem is the solution. It is extremely frustrating to me that affordable housing is such an issue. I am definitely along the lines more that housing is a human right, and I don't have magic solutions, but I do think that we also have this loneliness epidemic, this crisis of people feeling isolated and disconnected. And so I do wonder about and encourage people to think about these ideas of creative housing, together. I have created videos and shared resources. There are businesses now that are helping people buy homes with their friends, coming up with the agreements, helping people think through who would be a good person to live with. How does this work? So I do think that's a big part of it. There are also, it may not be, and it's not fair and it's frustrating. You may not get to live in San Francisco. You may not get to buy a house or an apartment in New York City. But if you're willing to, use some creative lifestyle design, here in the US, there's this wonderful young woman on TikTok making videos about how to go through our USDA, the Department of Agriculture, to get loans to buy property and start a farm. If we can get out of the conventional, I want a single family home in a suburban area, or I want an apartment right downtown, I do think that there are some possibilities and opportunities, or, maybe you go somewhere that's not, the coolest, hottest place to live for a while, but you start there and you get that solid foundation and it's more affordable to buy something. or you creatively piece together free places to live for a while you're saving up money to start something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I've been exploring this a lot lately, actually, because I came across a group of people recently from Japan who were talking about the re-ruralization movement in Japan and how the government there is actually paying people 3 years of wages to move out to countryside areas that have been depopulated by the urbanization movement of development and progress, and to pay for them to actually start their life again in the countryside and to reactivate the rural economies. And they don't have to be farmers. They could be farmers, or they could start up a local business. And I think this is a really interesting thing that government has recognized the importance of supporting the re-ruralization, the relocalization of economies out in the countryside. And I would love to see where else this is happening, and maybe to start to, see these ideas in different places, because imagine that, this transition to move outside of places where you feel like there's lots of resources, or where you know a place, and to start in an area where there's probably minimal resources. Wouldn't it be great to have that kind of support behind you? But whether you do or not, I've seen this happen in Australia as well, where a group of friends will say, okay, well, let's together go out and start living in this rural town over here, and together start, maybe a food cooperative, or a community farm of some sort, or a small collective that supports each other. And then that, starts to attract other people into that space and create a network around that. And I think too, shifting our perception about what is possible around where we live, and thinking differently about, education and work. And, the digital revolution actually has helped with that. We're now not necessarily tied to have to work downtown. We can work wherever. We can actually set up ourselves to be able to have our livelihoods based in a place, but be connected globally. And so I know from my work now too, it's revolutionized how I can work in the world and be deeply connected to place, live very simply, but work internationally without a huge ecological footprint. And I really love that possibility. Not to say that the digital world doesn't have a big footprint, but also being wise about that. So let's just talk a little bit more about some of the tips to help people get from maybe being a bit stuck. There's different pathways. And I know that, as a coach, on an eco money coach, you must come across a lot of different strategies or different examples about ways that people are stuck and ways that people are moving out of that. So in terms of getting that sort of personal economic freedom that aligns with values, starting by looking at getting rid of debt and looking where your money's coming and going from, really being clear about your values. What are some other tips and tricks that you could suggest for folks who are listening to really pay attention to?
Okay. Well, first, before we move on, if I can just go back to the housing, and if anyone in your U.S. audience is listening, I do have a freebie of sorts that I created that I call Creative Paths to Housing and Homeownership. And it's something you can find by going to the links on my Instagram and my TikTok account. And so it's a spreadsheet where I've listed a number of creative out of the box type things like I just talked about. If anyone wants, it's most helpful for people in the US.
And actually, before you go on too, Laura, I just want to really encourage people to go and have a look at your TikTok and Instagram. There's some great resources there. You really just touch on a whole lot of key points. I've been browsing through that and thinking, what a great resource. Thank you for doing that. It's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. For me, what was really helpful early on in my journey was just, I mentioned reading Your Money or Your Life and Finding Fire, but reading other people's stories, and just getting these ideas about what is possible.
Yeah.
And I wasn't looking for the exact model because everyone's life is going to be different, but there's so much inspiration out there. Even, like what was really inspiring for me were the stories of people living without money. It wasn't that I was going to adopt that as my way of life, but that, just thinking about, okay, yeah, lived that way for a while. They were able to do it, and I can tweak that. I can incorporate that into my life. It's very hard to give specific tips because everyone's situation is so different. I will say, I feel like there's so much need and opportunity for people to do the work of permaculture and to do regenerative work, and there are even very wealthy people who are, paying for these skills and services. So I don't, it feels like it's prime time, so getting very clear on what aspect or area of permaculture is compelling to you, where that meets your skills, and then investing in those skills. I think the niches,
Mm.
we've got lots of permaculture people going out and doing the landscaping and design. And if that's really what your passion is, okay, still go do it. But, we could use permaculture accountants. And gosh, wouldn't it be great to have some permaculture lawyers? You know, eh, but then whatever it is, go to the niches. I think that's where the joy is, where you get in the flow of learning about it,
Mm.
and doing it. That's where I see people succeeding, on TikTok and Instagram and in the world. That's just they've found the niche,
Mm.
where their passion meets the need. And I
Yeah.
think there's so much potential for that.
Yeah. And I think that's, so I've been teaching permaculture for, gosh, longer than I'd like to admit. And I've been teaching permaculture teachers for a long time. And I always talk about that very thing. It's not about, don't just take a cookie cutter model and go, okay, here's permaculture, this is it. Like, what's going on in your local community? What's going on for you? What lights your fire? Where does the local need meet where you're passionate about? And what's that piece? And that, if you're a permaculture educator designing programs to be able to help to activate that or support that in your local community, there's the edge where you can actually generate a possible income through your permaculture passion in that space. And so finding a way to apply a permaculture lens to whatever it is that you do. So yeah, if you are an accountant or a lawyer or a builder or a shop owner, like, what is it that you can do to apply that permaculture lens and really align what you're doing with the values of earth care, people care, and fair share. And there's a couple of other things that I wanted to talk about, and that, this gift economy, which we've kind of talked about a bit because, talking about moneyless way, but this, I think there's so much more possibility of entering into economic abundance when we really embrace this sense of being in the gift economy. And so instead of like hoarding things, we're sharing things. Instead of like thinking about what we can get, it's like what can we collectively work on together, and how can we be part of exchanging goods and services without money. We were part of setting up different let systems in the early days of Crystal Waters. And I found now that we don't necessarily use it because the let system helped to set up a way of thinking about being in relationship with people. And we don't need to track it anymore because we're just in that sense of, oh, yeah, like, let's work on this together. So I wonder, from a gift economy perspective, how would you encourage people to begin that, move more into it? What are some simple ways to really embrace that more?
Well, I think one super simple way is even just participating in your local buy nothing
Yeah.
group, where you're exchanging things for, offering things and receiving things for free. Buy nothing groups are all around, and they're each one is different because they're based on, who lives there and what are the coordinators, prioritizing. But that I think is a good place to start. I also, just getting to know your neighbors more, and finding ways to borrow things from them and lend things to them, share things with them. I do a lot of foraging and riding my bike. So I'm often like just riding around, offering people things, and then people remember me and it comes back to me. I also just think opening our minds and just looking for the recognizing the opportunities to participate in the gift economy. And this is a skill I'm still building. I had a friend who I still have this friend who runs a local fruit co-op, and he needed a place to store his inventory and his supplies because he vends at our local farmers market at the weekend. And my boyfriend was like, well, Laura, your garage is empty. So now this friend stores his supplies in my garage and I get free fruit, from the co-op. And he's also trained in Thai massage. So every once in a while I get a massage and now I get to see my friend more often,
Yeah.
and it was just, there was this opportunity and I just had to open my mind once my boyfriend said it. I was like, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. But I just even, you know, perceiving it, and I think so much about in general, I think there's so much more wealth around us that we just don't perceive. We get fed this message, and this goes back to, I think, one of your first questions. Another myth is this myth of scarcity.
Yeah.
We're fed this myth of scarcity in capitalism, and it's just not true. Not that resources, I'm not saying all resources are fairly distributed and you just need to open your eyes and it's there, but there is, a lot more abundance around us than we're, led to believe in the messaging. And so the more we can do to open our minds to it, the more we're pushing back against capitalism and enriching our lives. And then the more of that we have to use in interject into the gift economy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing when you start to see it, and there's so many opportunities everywhere. But like you're saying, it's being able to see the possibilities, being able to identify them, and being able to enrich the relationships where those things do become possible. So really focusing on that social capital and building community and opening yourself to that possibility. And I think getting on your bike is one of the best things. I know that myself, walking or getting on your bike, getting out of your car, getting out of your house, getting outside and lifting your gaze and smiling while you're walking around and say good day and like, yeah, sharing things. I think it's, or noticing things like, like you, I'm often going around foraging things and someone will see me like looking at things and they'll ask, and so start sharing, and you just build relationship by being out in community. I don't think we're out in community enough to build those relationships. And I think that's one of the key places to start this richness abundance. Like, knowing who's around you. Like, I think what you were saying before about that loneliness epidemic, that's so, it signifies so much where we're at in the world. And I wish that it wasn't just when we have disasters that people come together. Like, how can we continue those kind of relationships and that kind of support and help for one another and opening the doors to one another and sharing our surpluses with one another without the disasters? I mean, when you think about it, we are in a climate emergency. We are in a biodiversity emergency. We are in lots of different emergencies. And, perhaps if we could expand our field of vision and think, okay, these things are going to really help to support us to be more regenerative in our actions. Like, let's do that. And I worry too about, where things are going in your country at the moment, where everything's so much more financially transaction. I wonder, you probably don't want to go there. I don't know, but there's two things that I worry about, that things are going to go fast in the wrong direction, but I also feel that there's going to be a lot of reaction or response to this by communities rising up to meet their needs, to become more regenerative, to become more responsive, to become more resilient financially and ecologically, because of the forces that are at play at the moment. And I wonder whether you have any reflections on that.
Well, I think I go more along the lines of, what you just said, the second one. I mean, all things are possible. I tend to be an optimist and but also a realist. And that's one of the things for me is the gift of permaculture feels like it prepares you to navigate this and and to connect with people around you so that you're not navigating it alone. I don't have a crystal ball. It is scary times here in the US. But again, I think this focus on resilience that is inherent in permaculture, along with, that resilience in community is going to be a big part of it because none of us are going to survive this alone.
Yeah. So, as a way of wrapping up, I mean, a lot of people who listen to this, because I'm a permaculture educator and I focus on teaching permaculture teachers, will be thinking, okay, well, how can we be weaving more of this, focus into our programs that we offer people? How can we be weaving this more into our conversations that we have in our communities? What are the things that you really want to encourage people to be talking more about in the permaculture community?
How the practicalities of, okay, I've got my PDC or I'm going to have it after this class. I've got this grand vision. How am I going to fund it? How am I going to make this a financial reality? What does this look like financially? Um, Part of our hope for Growing Free, our book, was that, permaculture instructors would read it and start, bringing this content to their PDCs, to their courses. Because I think our book was reviewed by someone over at the permies.com forum, and she said this was the missing piece in my permaculture library. Because we get all this great information, this great knowledge, and we get so excited in our PDCs, and we want that permaculture life, we want that financial freedom. But that roadmap wasn't there. And that's what this book is, And so I looked it up, and our book is available through Booktopia in Australia. We also have an ebook, and my permaculture and money ebook is available anywhere. I would just love to see permaculture instructors, bringing these conversations in, start talking about money, the financial realities, whether, I think sometimes we talk about like a permaculture business, like how would you structure a permaculture business? But the lifestyle design and the financial aspect of that lifestyle design is so important because otherwise we're just left kind of like, oh, I want it so badly. And I have this vision, but how do I do it? And, I would love to, I've done it a couple times and I would love to do it a lot more. I am available, to join permaculture instructors for online courses and bring this content to their classes. I would love to do more of that, but, permaculture instructors can buy them, their own copy of Growing Free, read that, familiarize themselves with it, or get my permaculture and money ebook. It's just 30 pages. It's a great bite-sized way to work with your students and don't leave everyone hanging with, oh, I've got this vision. Now how do I make it financially a reality?
Yeah, great. And it's so fantastic that you've taken the time, you and your co-authors, to put this content forward, and also that you've got, the there's a YouTube channel, you've got a TikTok channel, you've got a blog, you've got, the ebooks, all these resources. So for those who are listening, we'll make sure that we put all of the different resources in the show notes, and also the contact details for you, Laura. So if anyone did want to invite you to come and speak in their permaculture course, or if they'd like to ask you more questions, or, even get some support from you in thinking this through themselves, then they can find a way to get in touch with you. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today, Laura. It's been an absolute delight to talk about this, because, as you said, it is kind of the missing piece. It takes courage, probably most importantly, like you said, knowing that it's possible, knowing that it's doable. People do it, and that there are ways to move forward. And thank you so much. And I'd like to invite anyone who's listening to share your stories about this. Like, if this is how you're living your life, to share that out. Whether you have social media or want to get in touch with Laura or me to share your story more, because knowing that it's possible in different contexts is so very much part of making this possible for other people, and really helping humanity to reduce its ecological footprint and have a climate safe future. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, excellent. I would love to have people contact me with their examples of how they're designing their free permaculture lives. Like I said, that was a big part of my journey, is just hearing other people's stories. I think they're so valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Take care and enjoy your day. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Sense Making in a Changing World, a podcast of the Permaculture Education Institute. Check out the show notes below to find the link to Laura's website, YouTube, and resources, and visit permacultureeducationinstitute.org for details of all of our permaculture courses, events, and resources. The link for that's also in the show notes. And make sure you signed up to our newsletter to hear all of our updates, and come and join us here at the Permaculture Education Institute to learn practical skills for designing and teaching permaculture and making a good livelihood while living a permaculture-inspired, one-planet way of life. Until next time, take care. See you soon.